Okay, so now we're going to go on to work on these hands here. So first thing I'm going to do is switch to top view. I'm going to use the method we said before. Select the EP curve tool, set to linear. I'm going to use this as sort of like a template to create the joints on. So what I'm actually going to do here is we have 1, 2, 3 and an end joint 4. So we're just going to have 4 joints in there. And instead of clicking these on the actual mesh here and just clicking them out like we would normally, what I'm actually going to do is just hold grid snap, so X, or you can see at the top here when I'm toggling it. So I'm going to hold down X and just click out 4 CVs and hit enter. And with the attribute editor open in component display, I'm just going to display CVs just so we get that from the start. And what I'm going to do is press W for the move tool, and if you don't see the icon, it's because by default it'll create it in the origin. So I'll just go to J tool, or I'll go to modify center pivot, but I've added this to the shelf for easier access. And all I'm going to do is just, so actually instead of center pivot, I want the pivot to be on this first CV. So I'm just going to hit insert, and again holding X, grid snap it to that CV there. And what I'll do here is just move this into position on this first finger. And again, switching to perspective view, we can see it made it on the grid because we were looking down from the top. So I'm just going to switch to front view and move that up into position. And the reason I'm creating this with an EP curve tool is generally your fingers are quite straight. So the bones of your fingers, you can see how these fingers are pretty much quite straight. They're not straight with the grid, so you can see this end finger here, but they are generally quite straight. So if I clicked some joints in here, they would be quite parallel. And the best way to rig is keep things simple. So I know that I wanted these to bend on certain axes, so because your fingers can generally only bend on one axis, or you'll be animating that the most. So keeping these in a straight line instead of clicked out of line slightly is probably going to make it quite easy. So with this EP curve tool, just clicking out 4 CVs, I know that they're all in a straight line, and I can just rotate this into place. I could try to scale it up if I want, and it's not going to be so in position perfectly, but scale it up to the length of the finger. And then I'm going to control vertex, so right click control vertex, and up here again I've just hidden, so I've clicked this square icon here which is surfaces in the selection mask, so this means I can no longer select the mesh. So it's just going to make it a lot easier working with these curves. I'm going to select this CV, press W for the move tool, and we can either double click the move tool to bring up its options, or hold down W, which is a shortcut for the tool, and then just hit left click, and I've got all these options up here now. So what I'm going to do is actually go to object, because we rotated this, or in the tools here you can click object, and because we rotated this, it's going to rotate the move axes as well. So now I know that I can move this up and down, and we're still keeping in a parallel line. Select the next CV and move that into position, and right click object mode to go back to object mode, or you can click up at the top between these 2 icons here. So again, when you're using Maya, it's the same as modeling or rigging or animating or anything you learn in Maya. There's several different ways to do the same job. It's just a matter of figuring out which you prefer the best and which is the fastest. So I'm just hit Control D to duplicate, or edit, duplicate. Move this down again to the next knuckle, rotate it into place, and all I'm doing here is, I know I'm looking down from the top view and I just want to rotate from that top plane, and I can see here that the outer icon of this rotate tool is set to yellow. So you see any axis we click, it turns to yellow. That's the one we're working on. So this top view, you can click the Y axis or the top view, because the outer circle is the direction of the camera. So I can see here in the perspective it always faces us. But because we're working from the top, we know that those two are going to be the same. But just setting it to yellow, so clicking it so it's selected, I can just middle mouse click and drag instead of having to actually left click on the circle and get that into position. So it's again whichever works best for you. So get that position, scale it up so the last CV's on the end, and with the move tool, again it's on object mode, so I'm just going to move them into position. And again we can see here that there is really no difference. This finger is pretty much nearly almost perfectly parallel, so adding in that little imperfection of the joint chain doesn't really serve any purpose, so keeping it parallel is going to just save us time. And again duplicate and rotate, and again that activated, that yellow circle, it remembers your last time you selected it, so we can just quickly use the same axis again, rotate that into place and scale it up or scale it down even, and again just move them into place. Okay, so that's looking quite good, and I just want to check in all axes. So we're looking from the top, so we just want to keep looking between and make sure that these fingers are flat, they're not curving down, so we'd have to move those CVs down. So we know that's okay now, so all I'm going to do is just finish that off with the thumb. Hit Control D again, and the thumb's always quite an awkward one to sort of rig and skin, so we'll probably have a few issues with this setting the finger controls up, but we'll deal with that later on. So we'll just get as best as we can in here, get these into position where the knuckles are and the end joint. So really you'd only actually have, we could actually get rid of this joint here, and you don't really have, only really have this knuckle here and your next knuckle and the end, because your thumb's obviously shorter and it doesn't have that extra knuckle in there. So what I'm actually going to do is get this other joint here and just include it as the base, the further up of that thumb, so this way we can add in more control later on. And because this wasn't modelled level, I'm just going to go into perspective view and just sort of eye these into place. So here I'm hitting Control, left clicking and dragging a marquee selection, and with Control it's telling it to deselect. So just deselecting, and we can do the same, hit Shift, drag a marquee selection over that to reselect it. So that's, so again just check from all axes, we'll check from the top. It's looking okay, let's move, probably move that in a little bit more. So I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hide the polygons, I might as well hide the grid, and go to the joint tool and holding down V, and again at the top you can see it toggling, so you can click that if you want, or hold down V to toggle it, and I'm just going to click these joints in and hit enter to end the tool, and then hit Y to reactivate the last used tool, which was the joint tool. Hold V again, click them in, hit Y, hit V for vert snap, and again. And depending what you want in for your animation, like what we said earlier with the double joint, you could add double joints on these knuckles here if you wanted some really nice deformation on the knuckles, because again if we get some extreme poses we might get that nasty bend in there, but for most cases it doesn't really matter too much. It depends what you're wanting and what your character's sort of aesthetics are like, what his form is like. If he had really long fingers, and if they're going to get that sharp bend in there, then you might want to go ahead and add in those double joints. But for this, it should be okay. So the last step, what we can do is just select all these joints here, all the finger joints, shift select the wrist, and just hit P to parent. So the final result of that is, if we go to the outliner here, we've got these curves in here, and I'm just going to group these actually, and call this capital TMP, and I'm basically doing that because I don't know if I want to use these curves later on. I might want to, it's like if anything happened, these joints weren't working correctly and I want to reposition them, and I suddenly need these curves again. It's just a good case to either keep them in an old save or keep some sort of temporary stuff. And the same with modelling. If you were modelling with NURBS curves, you always keep the curves. Just keep a folder of temporary stuff that you can easily access, and then at the end of the rig we can just delete this because we don't really need it. But it's just there if I ever need to go back and reuse those. And in the channel editor, I'll just actually hide that group so it's out of mind, but it's there if I need it. So at the end of that, holding Shift, click to expand, we can see we've now created that joint chain, and how that's going to look. So what we need to do here is rename these joints. So I'm just going to, what we'll do, so I'll hit JT for joint, BN for bind, because again these are going to be bound joints used for skinning, then underscore, and again you can use your any sort of naming reference that you use, but it's good to keep these quite descriptive and quite short. So JT, we know that's joint, BN, I know that's binding. So JTBN is a bound joint, and it's only 4 letters, so it's quite short and sweet. And then we'll separate that with an underscore, and then we'll say which orientation it is it. So it's these characters, it's his left arm. So I'm just going to go underscore L underscore and I'm just going to pause the video at this point and go through and rename each one of these joints individually. Okay, so I've just gone through and renamed all those arm joints, and so here we've just got like left shoulder, left elbow, and the naming convention of here is again joint JTBN for bind joint, left, and basically I start every word in lowercase, and then every word afterwards you'd start in uppercase if it's part of the same sort of word. So down here or up here, like we've got elbow, and because we had 2 elbows, we actually have elbow A and then elbow B, and then we'll go back to wrist and underscore O1, and then again with the thumb and the fingers we have thumb A underscore O1, thumb B underscore O1. So it's just easy to recognise these, and I use the names for the fingers. You could use anthropological names like phalanx, phalanges, metacarpals, whichever way you prefer. And just another point is actually when doing like mel scripts, one thing advantage I found was if you've got names like the anthropological, like anatomical names for the actual bones, like humerus, you know, or for the fingers you have the metacarpals, the carpals, the phalanges for the fingers, having them in the mel script, and then so in the actual the code it was anthropological terms, and then what they physically create is things like index finger, the middle finger. That way you can differentiate the physical things that have been made inside Maya to the code. So using different names you can sort of separate things even though they're made for the same thing. You just know which case they've been used for. So at the end of this, so you can pause the video now and just go through these names or use your own names. And another thing here, we've got JT end. So JT underscore, well, JT end underscore left thumb end O1. And we've got this for every end joint. And this is basically, again, it's not a bind joint. We're not going to use this joint to skin, because if you think, the only thing this joint's going to do is rotate, and all that rotation is from the one above it. So this joint down here is not really going to do much for the skinning. We can use it for skinning, but if we added all the weight that this had to this joint up here, there's going to be no difference. So these are just here so we can attach things to them or do different things with. So just adding the tag end, I know that these are the ends of the joint chains and we don't really need them for binding. So I'm going to hit shift and close, so we can close all these joints. And the last thing we can do here is we're just going to go to skeleton, so underneath animation, skeleton, and mirror joints. We'll just go to the option box, and I'm just going to go edit reset settings, and we're going to mirror across. So again, the advantage of giving it a underscore L underscore, it means we can mirror this. We know it's a symmetrical character. We can mirror it across, and mine's going to automatically rename everything to the right side. So we can see here that the Y is the up axis, and Z is facing forward. So we want the YZ plane. So we'll click YZ, and we'll search for underscore L underscore, and replace with underscore R underscore. And this just means that Maya's going to go through, we'll just go ahead and do that. Maya's going to just go through and mirror that across, and we can see in here that we have the exact same naming convention, exact same names. The only difference is L has now become R, and this just means this is, again, it's consistent for one thing. So we'll create two arms quite simply, but later on Maya can use these same naming conventions for skinning tools. So mirroring the skin weights, it knows that that's the left and that's the right, so it's going to be a lot easier. And then if you use this on any external programs like Motion Builder or any game engines, it's going to become a lot easier to try and use these joints again, because we know they're exact same, we know it's left and right, so it's just going to be a lot easier.